What's up, everybody? I got a lot I got to say today, so this might be a multi-part video. I want to talk about the dollar going down. All right, now I was the only one who predicted. There might have been others who said the dollar was going to go down, but they tend to be people who have said that or who say that all the time. People like Schiff, and they say it for reasons that they don't even understand. Like I think he's saying there's going to be more quantitative easing. That's not going to happen. Okay, the dollar is going down for exactly the reason I said, and that's because the Fed is raising interest rates. Okay, none of these people understand this, but this is a very clear MMT concept. I was telling you about this already going back, for a while now. I said as the Fed raises interest rates, the dollar is going to go down. And that's exact. And I said gold was going to go up. And they raised rates on the 14th of December. Gold was 1120. Now it's over $1,200 an ounce. Okay, so the others don't understand this. I have been telling you. Now, before I get into the longer term dynamic of what's going to happen with the dollar and inflation. And this is very, very important because I'm going to lay out the dynamic here for the next 4 years. We are entering a macro scenario now that is fundamentally different from what we saw over the last 8 or 9 years. Okay? Let me repeat that. We are entering into a macro environment now which is going to be fundamentally different, opposite in fact from what we saw over the last 8 to 9 years when the Fed was in doing QE and taking rates down to zero, and that kind of deflationary forces that were injected into the economy. This whole thing is changing, okay? But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the smart viewers of this channel and the smart people who subscribe to my report. We really have some very, very intelligent people out there. And, a lot of times some of the trolls, well, why do you do this? Why do you sell? Listen, I get connected up or I meet people or some of you are so thoughtful and smart. It is really, really, it's just a lovely thing to see. There's a lot of dumb people on this channel too, the trolls who put up stupid comments, but I digress. I don't want to get into that. So I had a couple of comments emailed to me too, in particular that I want to highlight, I want to talk about because they were very insightful. Okay, these people really get it. You guys really get it. One of the comments said, Mike, why does the government sell treasuries anyway, to begin with? What is the need for that? Because the Fed pays interest on reserves directly, and the need to manage reserve balances no longer applies. And that's a very insightful comment. That person really gets it, okay? And I said to that person, you're absolutely right. There is no need to manage reserves anymore because the Fed pays interest directly on reserves, and no institution, no bank is going to lend below the policy rate because that's like imposing a tax on itself. If the Fed is paying 75 basis points or 1%, no bank's going to lend for 50 basis points because they're going to earn more than that just by sitting there with their reserves, all right? In the past, the Fed and Treasury together would act to manage the level of reserves to sustain that policy rate because when the government spends, the reserves just pile up in the banking system and the natural rate goes down to zero. It would go down to zero very quickly if that management wasn't there. But the very act of paying interest on reserves directly, that puts the floor on that rate. Now, so it's really, and by the way, the sale of treasuries was always just a reserve drain. It's not borrowing, okay? I said this. The government doesn't need to borrow its own money, which it's the monopoly issuer of that money. The whole suggestion of that is ludicrous. It's ridiculous, all right? You don't borrow what you can create without limit. And the whole reason that the sale of treasuries, and by the way, this goes all the way back to the days of the gold standard, when the money was convertible into a fixed quantity of gold. And the government wanted to absorb that money because on a gold standard, it needed the gold to print money, right? The gold backed the money. So if people had the government's money and they decided to cash it in for gold, the government would have no money creating power. Okay, so they would issue, actually they were gold certificates, which took away those reserves, all right, and that constrained the ability of the public to exchange that, to take away the government's gold. And it's an anachronism. It goes back to those days. We don't need it anymore. But let's say that there still is a need to manage reserves, because let's say as the government spends, I mean, reserves could pile up into the quadrillions. And if the Fed is paying interest on that, even if it's a tiny little bit of interest, if it's in the quadrillions, you know, it could be a problem. So to manage those reserves, it needs to sell nothing longer than a 30-day T-bill. I mean, that's all really it should be selling. You don't need to sell all these 2 years and 5 years and 10 years and 30 years. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's a form of, anyway, it's a form of subsidy, really, to wealthy people. Who owns treasuries? It's people who have money. All right, so that was the first question. It was an excellent question. It wasn't even a question. It was a point brought up by a viewer of this channel and a subscriber. And I'm saying, great question, very intelligent. The next email I got, also very, very insightful and intelligent. The guy says to me, Mike, there was an article in Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg website, where the columnist said that if Trump imposes these border taxes, if he puts on this 25% tax or whatever he's talking about, then the dollar is going to go up by 25% because it's going to reduce the trade deficit. And again, I just have to say about these Bloomberg columnists, they don't know jack shit about economics. Excuse me for the French. But my guy who emailed me said, Mike, that's wrong, right? Because by enacting tariffs, that's price setting. He got it, right? He got it, nailed it. Price setting higher. You're creating an inflation. You're creating higher prices, which would be negative for the currency. Absolutely right. The guy nailed it on the head. Tariffs would cause the dollar to go down, not up. And just because a country might, and in the end, if perhaps we run a trade surplus, doesn't automatically and necessarily mean that the dollar is going to be strong. What is going to affect the dollar is that price setting. The tariffs are a form of price setting, raising prices, inflationary, negative for the currency. It's going to be reflected immediately. And by the way, that might even be one of the reasons right now why we are seeing the dollar start to sell off. Because, you know, smart people, and there's not a lot of them because most people are just zombies out there, but there might be some big, smart players, maybe not so big, but smart players who understand this, and the dollar is starting to weaken. All right? So, great job, guys. Beautiful questions, beautiful comments, very insightful, very smart, very intelligent. Now, as for the dynamic of what's going to happen with the dollar, let me just, I'll give you an opening scenario. I'm going to come back. I'm going to do another video. We are in now. Trump is a monetary policy hawk. I talked about this yesterday. He personally likes low interest rates as a real estate developer, but he said all along that, you know, that hurts savers, it hurts the middle class. I spoke yesterday about his potential choices for Fed chief. You got Hubbard in there, you got John Taylor in there, you got Kevin Warsh, right? All these guys are monetary policy hawks. We're moving into a new environment here. And the dynamic is going to be rising rates, which is price setting higher, which is inflationary, which is negative for the currency. Now, I'm going to end this video here. It was just a basic explanation. I'll come back later. I'll get into more detail on the cycle that's going to be created that will sustain these trends. Probably, I think, for the next 4 years at least. All right, that's a Fed term. A term of a Fed chair is like 4 years, right? So I'll get back into it in another video. But great job on those questions and comments, guys. See you later. Bye-bye.